Let me say good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
I am Reverend Lewis Stewart. I'm president of the United Christian Leadership Ministry, and we have various other organizations represented here, and we all agree on the same theme. This press conference today is in two parts. First, we will address the Monroe County's harassment bill, and secondly, law enforcement and the district attorney's call for a moratorium on bail reform. First, the Republican-controlled Monroe County Legislature recently approved a tyrannical piece of legislation co-sponsored by legislators Carla Boyce and Kara Halstead, in which citizens who simply annoy police officers may face jail time of 1 year or pay a hefty fine of $5,000. It is a ridiculous and reprehensible piece of legislation. It gives law enforcement the power to interpret an action by a citizen as an annoyance or alarming, and therefore they may be arrested. And it also erodes some of the progress in civil rights. In other words, the use of annoy or alarming tramples on freedom of speech. A police officer might be annoyed by a citizen using the phone in his or her camera, or annoyed by a protest sign, and they will suffer a penalty via this legislation. This is reactionary legislation. It is clearly designed to stifle free speech. It tramples on First Amendment rights. There are laws already in place, such as the criminal prosecution of those who threaten cops. They always use what they call obstruction of government administration. Clearly, this legislation is meant to intimidate and discourage social justice activists who are advocates for police reform, accountability, and transparency. It is fascist legislation and denies individuals the right to question police officers. If the police officers are acting beyond the scope of just and legal police procedure, they can be arrested. If signed into law, it is a step backwards. It will have the authority to legally silence protesters of police reform, or anyone for that matter, because the cops may view one's words or nonviolent actions as an annoyance or alarming or threatening to the officer's personal safety. It will cause further division and strife between members of the community and law enforcement. In summary, it proposes arrest by annoyance. It tramples on First Amendment rights, i.e. free speech. It is broad and subjective. It is vague and unconstitutional. The Republicans who passed this bill should be ashamed of themselves. Denying the rights of people to exercise freedom of speech for fear of arrest and incarceration. I'm calling on all of those who are defenders of the First Amendment and free speech to stand up and say to the county executive not to sign this legislation into law. I'm also calling upon the community to attend the county legislature's public hearing on this and speak out against this annoying, alarming, and threatening legislation. Secondly, let me touch on the call for a moratorium on bail reform by law enforcement and the district attorney's office. These repressive forces are strongly attempting to derail criminal justice reform by calling for a moratorium. Lawmakers in New York have passed significant reforms which will impact for the better New York's criminal justice system by passing reforms that will reduce reliance on cash bail to determine a person's liberty, expand discovery, and further enforce the right to a speedy trial. The reforms will have a great and positive impact on many New Yorkers who have been forced to sit in jail months or years even before even being found guilty of a crime. To have these reforms is in the best interest of the pursuit of justice. However, the police community and the district attorney's office are using shameful fear-mongering tactics, stating that if these new reforms are implemented, that people will die. More criminals will be let loose on the streets, and that these reforms will have an adverse effect on public safety. This is false. This is a lie. This is their propaganda. There is no evidence that bail reform will result in a dramatic loss of life. Those who are being released this winter are low-level, nonviolent offenders. The officials in law enforcement and the district attorney's office will tell you that they were left out of the process. That's another falsehood. Across the state, judges and district attorneys and advocates have been traveling to Albany to discuss criminal justice reforms. Their pushback reveals why Black and Hispanic communities have very little reason to trust law enforcement and the district attorney's office. They have a double standard. For example, when law enforcement speaks of an opioid crisis, they all get behind it. It is a mental health intervention modality because it involves white people. However, with people of color, the intervention is arrest, trial, and incarceration.
Yes.
Black and Hispanic addicts are criminalized, while white addicts are routed into non-incarceration programs. This is hypocrisy. This is a crime. Ultimately, this is about a power struggle between those of us who desire justice and reform and those who desire to continually repress people of color through over-policing our communities and criminalization. These two are factors, the harassment bill and the call for a moratorium on bail reform, are two sides of the same racist perspective. We, the people, must use every nonviolent tactic at our disposal to combat and overcome the forces of reaction, the movement of anti-justice, and the shadows of fascism, and say to them that we will not allow you to plunge our community into further despair, brokenness, criminalization, and incarceration. We will challenge you and fight you with every means at our disposal.
Definitely.
We need to call a halt to criminalization and incarceration and instead invest in jobs, invest in training, invest in education, invest in housing, invest in mental health care. This is how we create a safe community environment. At this time, we have several speakers here. We have Monroe County Legislator Vincent Felder, who's going to speak, and after that, my friend and partner, Iman Abid, who is director of the NYCLU, and she will introduce our other speakers.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
When the legislation came up for this anti-harassment bill that is being called, first of all, it was done outside the ordinary process. And this is the same issue we had with the legislation they put in trying to take the incoming county executive powers away that they pulled last week. We have a process in the county that we're supposed to follow. When legislation comes up, it's supposed to amend the charter. It's supposed to go to a committee called Agenda Charter. They put this through as a matter of urgency, meaning it's an emergency. There is no emergency here. The sponsors of the bill, I have no reason personally to doubt their sincerity, said they did it because of recent events and they wanted to stand up for police officers. You know, they claimed there was an incident in New York City where I think the cow got doused with water, and then we had the stabbing over on 4th Street, but that individual is being charged with attempted murder, so I think he's being dealt with by the courts.
Yes.
So I don't see the need for it. But then when you look at the language of it, to say annoy, I've been known to annoy people. And I get annoyed a lot. No, because people, not sometimes intentionally or not intentionally, they annoy you. So when you say intentionally annoy, how can you determine that somebody is intentionally trying to annoy you? First of all, it's a subjective thought process that you put into the hands of a police officer. Right. Secondly, the Supreme Court has ruled over and over again on the free speech that you can cuss people, you can cuss police officers out. Yes. You can stick your middle finger up at them.
Yes.
You can do just about anything, yes. And it's protected. The New York State Court of Appeals has already struck down laws with the word annoy in it. So I'm trying to figure out why they would pass a law that they know is unconstitutional. Right. Yeah. And we sat in the meeting, and I talked to, they had the county attorney there in the legal department, and I asked, what would someone have to do to violate this law? He couldn't give me an answer.
Wow.
So how do you pass a law that says that it's going to stop this certain behavior, but you can't tell me what behavior it takes to violate it? Yes. So that tells you automatically this is so broad and vague to make it unconstitutional and unenforceable. And it's a dangerous precedent to go down, particularly when we have an issue in the city, in particular with police community relations. We've been trying, Reverend Stewart's been working on for a long time trying to build. This does not help. This takes it in the other direction. I know some people are upset about the Police Accountability Board, you know, and what that's going to mean. But the reality of it is, even Chief Shepard, the former police chief, said that when he was a young cop, he would have loved a law like this. But as a police chief, he would hate it because you're putting officers in a position they don't need to be in. And so you're causing arrests that may occur that don't need to occur. And this goes along with the whole idea of criminal justice reform, the bail reform, the raise the age. The law enforcement and the district attorneys are against both of those legislations. But as a black man, it's our people who are the ones that are being overpopulated in the jails. It's not, you know, mass incarceration has hurt our community in a very big way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You know, and so when the state finally decides to turn the tide and reverse it, yes, and bring it back more towards an equitable balance, I mean, criminals who are convicted belong in jail. If they commit a crime, it's serious enough, they deserve to be locked up. But when you have low-level people, low-level offenders who have not even been convicted of a crime, and have them sitting in jail for months and months and months. This young man in New York City was sitting there for 3 years in Rikers Island and took his own life. That's ridiculous, because it's not, bail, the purpose of bail is not to keep people off the street. The purpose of bail is to make sure people come back to court. And so when you start trying to take the bail system and use it, which they've done for years, and use it to keep people off the street, then you've now perverted the purpose of bail. And so now that the state has finally realized, hey, this is not the way to do it. Now the police, some police, at least the police chiefs and the prosecutors are now up in arms. Because if you understand how the system works, all the stuff with discovery and bail reform, it all goes together, because you have someone who gets charged with a crime. He gets a bail he can't make. He sits in jail for months at a time. He doesn't know what evidence they have against him, if they have any. And so then after a while, they come to him, he gets a plea bargain, and he gets a conviction, because, not because he went to trial and the jury convicted him, but because he just gave up, because I've sat here so long, you're going to let me out now. So this is taking away a tool that they have to keep their conviction rates high. But it's not the job of the law and the society to do that for them. And so we have to make sure that we fight back against this idea that we're going to put a moratorium on. There may be some things as it is put in practice that we find need to be tweaked or corrected. That's part of the course. Anytime you have a new law, you never know how it's going to act, how it's going to work initially. But that does not mean you throw the whole thing out and say we're not going to do it. Now, and as far as I know, I don't think there's any stomach in the state to do that. Thank God. But I think some people. I think some people are using it for political advantage. We have another election for the state senate, and state assembly next year, and I think that's what's going on. But we're going to keep fighting to make sure that we have the society that we deserve to have, and that we're not continually locking up black and brown people and leaving them there, because that's not what we deserve.
Good morning. Yesterday, law enforcement agencies from across the greater Rochester region rallied against the people's voice, claiming that they were not a part of the conversation on bail reform, asking that a delay be put on bail reform. What they failed to recognize is how undermining their call was to their own constituencies, the ones who helped pass this reform in the first place. New York cannot afford to reverse course and follow a handful of politicians who insist that criminalizing poverty is justice. Earlier this year, lawmakers pushed New York's criminal justice system in the right direction by passing reforms that will significantly reduce our reliance on cash bail to determine a person's liberty, expand discovery, and further enforce the right to a speedy trial. What law enforcement failed to acknowledge is that the harms of cash bail are tremendous. People lose their jobs, homes, and children while incarcerated. These impacts perpetuate poverty in already over-policed communities, draining huge sums of resources through their bail payments, and detaining someone simply because they have not been convicted of a crime, but because they lack the financial resources to afford a cash bond that threatens their constitutional protections, including those under the 14th Amendment, due process and equal protection. To suggest that jailing poor people because they don't have money is effective at keeping the public safe is false and reprehensible. We have no evidence to prove that money bail even keeps communities safe. And in fact, black and brown communities, their loved ones, and those without economic resources to thrive suffer the most harm. Cash bail is a corrupt and inherently unjust system that bases a person's freedom on the size of their wallet and disproportionately harms low-income New Yorkers. Shame on the law enforcement agencies that refute the trauma they've inflicted on the people who have already been harmed by the system. And for the people who are supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, but we know have been implemented otherwise. This is a message to our law enforcement agencies and district attorney that represent us and are supposed to keep us safe. You need to step up and step back. We cannot allow a system that continues to perpetuate poverty to exist. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to welcome my colleague and lead organizer for the Genesee Valley chapter of the ACLU of New York, Ashley Gant.
Hello, everyone. So yesterday, as we sat in the press conference with police agencies and agencies adjacent, what they were asking for is a plea to the governor to put a delay on the legislation that we know is coming in 2020. ACLU, along with other organizations that fight for justice, got together and we wrote a statement to our legislators, and tons of organizations signed on, so I want to read it. Dear Senate and Assembly leadership, as community leaders, organizers, and residents, we urge you to reject the efforts by a handful of individuals, including Sheriff Todd Baxter, to delay the implementation of reforms that we so long fought for. We are on the cusp of achieving critical steps toward justice and have the opportunity to address the harms of a pretrial system that has devastated communities for decades, specifically communities of color and poor communities. The statewide reforms set to go into effect on January 1st were promised by our elected officials to right the wrongs of an inherently inequitable pretrial system that has historically stripped too many individuals of their civil liberties. From 2010 to 2014, 27,923 people were held in jail on bail. No New Yorker should have to risk losing their freedom, jobs, children, and housing simply because they cannot afford to pay bail. Furthermore, no New Yorker should have the right. No New Yorker should have their rights stripped away from them before they know the basic information about their case. This is why we need the implementation of the reforms to ensure better access to speedy trial, guarantee defendants access to case evidence, and stop a money bail system from criminalizing so many people for their financial circumstances. The grumblings of those invested in maintaining the status quo should not determine what justice should look like, especially when their proposals suggest that we continue to rob people of the promises of justice. Let's be very clear. The attacks made against these reforms are attacks against our neighbors, our families, and our community. Therefore, we ask that you wholly reject the demands to derail a pathway to pretrial justice and remain committed to the promise of a fair and just system, for only then will we achieve safety. Respectfully, NYCLU, Enough is Enough, Citizen Action, Vocal New York, Action Together Rochester, Surge Rochester, Metro Justice, UCLM, the Justice Initiative, ROC Acts, and the Racial Justice Initiative. Thank you. Now we're going to have our colleague from Citizen Action, Stephanie Vargas.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So today I'm furious, and you should be too. New York State took a major step forward in passing pretrial reform laws that would improve the lives of tens of thousands of families in our communities and across the state. For too long, our communities have been fed this false narrative that incarceration makes us safer, but experience and extensive research proves that otherwise. The sheriff claims that pretrial reforms will put Monroe County residents at risk, but between 2010 and 2014, 27,923 people were held in Monroe County Jail because they could not afford to pay their bail. Over half of them were charged with misdemeanors or even less serious infractions. Let me be very clear. When I say that this is about money, it's about race, and it's about class. Because those who can afford to pay their bail do, and oftentimes they are white. But people who look like me and people who look like those in this room rot in those prisons. And those places are not safer. Since September 2018, at least 3 people in Monroe County Jail have committed suicide. It is also infuriating to hear the sheriff argue that those suffering from drug dependencies are better off in a jail cell, which only tells us that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of both the treatment options available in correctional facilities and how to address substance abuse disorder as a whole. You cannot punish people into sobriety. As someone who has seen the effects of substance abuse disorder firsthand, I can tell you that is false, and thinking that is a lazy short-term solution. And those who favor punishment over community-based treatment are not truly invested in the safety of our communities. Law enforcement has been doing everything in their power to subvert the will of lawmakers in a majority of the New Yorkers statewide since the day these pretrial laws have passed. Prosecutors and police are tasked with upholding the law, not undermining it by spreading misinformation to the public and through fear-mongering in the press. That is not your job.
No, it's not.
And trying to feed that to our communities, that is what makes us unsafe. And as you can see, we will not stand for it.
No way. Outstanding.
Next, I want to introduce Kim Smith from Vocal New York, statewide organizer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And just to reiterate what was already said here today, there is a lot of anger in this room. Anger that has been fueled by hurt. Hurt that our law enforcement, whose mission is to protect and serve, has come out delivering a fear-mongering oriented statement to our communities, and they told residents literally that people will die. But those of us who live, value, and respect our communities, those of us who here today, we know the truth. And the truth is that the New York State Governor, Assembly, and Senate have signed on to a very equitable policy and law that will do two things. Number one, it will level the playing field between the poor and the wealthy. The wealthy who get incarcerated for low-level offenses, pay their bail, go home to their families, organize their case, come back to court, and most often have those cases dismissed, thrown out, or reduced. However, when you are poor, you go to jail, you sit there. Your fate depends on in the hands of a law enforcement who has no respect or value for you anyway.
That's right. That's right.
And as you sit there, as they stated, you lose your jobs. You lose your schooling.
Yep.
And most importantly, many, yes, they lose their children. And so now you have an overabundance of CPS referrals. And so number two, taxpayers should be outraged by this. Taxpayers who do not want to pay taxes to have overcrowded jails, but taxpayers who want to pay their taxes for evidence-based programs that offer alternatives to incarceration. And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't make the statement that this is why we fought so hard for the police accountability. This is why we campaigned so hard for that DA race. To put a DA in place who would not stand for this type of fear-mongering, but who knew this was coming down the pike and was prepared to set up effective programs to address this. And so as a community, we are tired, we are fed up, and we have had enough.
Now, you've heard authentic anger here and a call for justice. I sit at the table with others in police community relations with these chiefs of police. They'll laugh and grin in my face and pretend that they're our friends. But then they band together and support injustice, support systemic racism. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I'm saying be pig or be puppy, but be something. Be authentic with us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right? Be authentic with us. And as someone said, this is about money.
Yes, sir.
It's about class.
Yes.
That's what it's about.
Yes, sir.
So we want to field any questions right now. Questions? Yes, sir.
What do you mean be pig or be puppy?
Be real.
That's
Be
it.
authentic.
Be authentic.
Be who you are. Don't be somebody that's going to laugh and grin in my face and say that you want police-community relations and that you want to improve the community, but yet you're undermining it at the same time.
Yes,
That's
sir.
all I'm saying.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Yes.
Are there any plans to help any of these inmates who are going to be released in about a month's time?
You're talking about reentry programs. No, we haven't gotten together on that yet, but we need to talk with our state legislators, right? And others who are in charge of these things and have the resources for them.
Yes.
And we will be sitting down and talking to them because people that come out of prison do need resources. They do need help. If they don't get the help, they're going to find themselves right back in prison again, all right? And that's another thing. The New York State parole system, that also needs to be reformed.
Yes.
Because they will do anything possible to put them back in prison.
Yes.
And that money goes to helping poor communities. Follow. Helps their economy. I know because I was a chaplain in the New York State prison system for 20 years.
Right.
So I know what goes on. And I know about the system.
Are you concerned that Monroe County is going to have 200 people put back into the community in the middle of winter? I mean, beyond working with state legislatures, are you working with any local organizations to kind of make sure that as people exit and they don't have family friends and loved ones meeting them, you're being taken care of? And if you're going to answer, can you just talk to the mic?
Yes, please. I want Vince Felder. Ashley, come on.
So I just want to address the fact that people deserve, no matter what season it is, not to be in jail.
Right.
Period. And
It's a tough time of year. If you walk out and you don't have someone there to say, I have some place for you to go, they might not know where to go.
the other part of that is we've reached out, NYCLU has reached out to every sheriff in the surrounding counties, every chief, to get together to see if we can work together so that this can be a natural or it can flow well, this implementation. And every single one of them have said no. On the other side of that, it is our responsibility as a community to advocate for more resources for underfunded shelters, underfunded reentry programs. I think when we ask these questions, we need to be very, very cognitive of what we're saying. People deserve to be free, whether it's summer, winter, fall, and it's the responsibility of the organizations who lock these people up for things like jaywalking, things like things like jaywalking, things like stealing a Lunchable from Wegmans, which literally happened. It's our responsibility. Those are poverty crimes, and it's our responsibility to advocate for implementation and resources to help protect these people.
There are organizations that I believe that are looking into that, and because of the way it's being implemented, they're not just going to take one day, dump 200 people into the community. Right. It's going to be there, but this is between now and January 1st. So it'll be enough time, and I'm sure they work with the social separate, the County Department of Social Services and other agencies to make sure that they are integrated back in the community, and we will be monitoring that to make sure that people who come out will have the resources they need to be reintegrated into the community and won't be just left out in the streets.
And let's not assume that we don't have families in communities.
Yes.
This burden usually falls on families.
Yes.
And most people locked up do have family and communities that's paying for commissary, that's paying for bail.
Right.
Come on.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Can I go back to Vincent? I just want to ask you about the legislation for the police annoyance legislation. It also includes peace officers and first responders like fire and EMS. Do you think that group deserves to have some kind of protection?
But they already have protection. They're protected under the law. Under the laws. New York State just passed a law a couple of years ago. They have protection. They have the same protection. This is to me. I didn't see the need and didn't understand where this came from because if you understand the law, there are laws on the books already to protect first responders.
Right.
Particularly after what happened up in Webster when the guy ambushed the firefighters a few years ago before Christmas. So there are laws on the books to protect first responders. That includes EMTs, firefighters, and peace officers and police officers. So this is just unnecessary, and it seems to be designed just to make somebody feel good. And that,
Wouldn't it have negative implications on the police accountability board's work? If someone's arrested for annoying a police officer, the police accountability board is there to make sure officers are doing their job right? I mean, it seems like it's a conflict. Do you
Well,
think it was set up because of that?
It could be, and I'm going to let Iman speak about this, but I know there's a lawsuit in the state already against one law like similar to this, and similar laws have been struck down in the past. She might talk. I don't think the law will ever be implemented because it's unconstitutional. So.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
It seems like it could be a conflict of interest with the Police Accountability Board if it is passed. Do you see that?
I mean, no, the harassment bill kind of just comes from a completely different avenue.
Right.
This is just a restriction of someone's First Amendment
Right.
rights. I mean, we clearly do see it as an unconstitutional violation, a constitutional violation. So I don't necessarily know exactly how it references or relates to the Police Accountability Board, because the Police Accountability Board only goes so far as composing a new process around how we want
Right.
to, intervene in civilian review complaints
misconduct.
against officers and misconduct. So I don't necessarily think that the two are actually related in any way, nor contradictory. I think if one is upheld, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other one is struck down or any other way. I think the harassment bill should be struck down. It should have never been passed. It was passed as a matter of urgency without getting public hearing or input on it. There are, as Vince has already mentioned, protections in place for the police in statutory law. And we do know that we need to expand those same privacy and other sorts of protections that are there for civilians, for officers to civilians as well.
Outstanding.
Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned a specific law for first responders. What law were you referring to?
I don't remember the name of the law, but there's a law they passed. After, remember the ambush? It's around this time, actually.
In Webster.
Yes, in Webster. There was a fire, I think, up on Lake Road. And so in the aftermath of that, there were laws passed to make
Right.
sure to protect first responders.
Especially through New York State.
It's New York State, yes.
Yes, there were. So we're not talking about first, the law mentions first responders. But first responders have not been in conflict with communities of color. Those who have been in conflict with communities of color on the front line are usually law enforcement officers. And those are the ones who will retreat and say, well, I felt fear for my life. That is why I killed him. An innocent black man.
Unarmed.
Yes.
I mean, if your house is on fire, you're not going to argue with the firemen.
Right.
To put the fire out.
Right.
You know, that's-
And so the thing is, they're so busy dealing with our community and trying to over-police our community.
Yes, sir.
And criminalize our community.
Yes, sir.
What they need to look at is police misconduct themselves.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's what they need to be investigating, but they don't. The first thing the Police Locust Club will say about a Christopher Pate or a Ricky Bryant or someone else who was accused of something and they were innocent, well, they violated a law. No, they didn't violate the law. They were violated.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Outstanding.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here. From here, we go to organizing against this harassment bill and against things that take away our rights. Thank you. You were wonderful.
Great.
Do what?
Thanks.
Hey,